Stellar Pioneers. Episode 1, Tentacles on Titan. Enjoying a comfortable orbit around Titan, Saturn's largest moon, the Star Rider's crew prepared their first shuttle voyage to the surface. 10 years ago, an unmanned expedition to the moon returned ecologic and geologic samples to Earth. Things looked promising for establishing a human colony. The enormous time, money, and scientific expertise dedicated to finding alternate habitable areas for humans wasn't negotiable. Time was running out for Earth. So the Little Dipper shuttlecraft made its careful descent through Titan's nitrogen-rich atmosphere. On board were the engineer and General Mr. Fix-It, Hank, ecologist Penelope and her space dog Stardust, geologist Arceus, head of security Roland, as well as 2 crack medical staff, Dr. Starla and Nurse Janet. None seemed overly nervous about the maiden voyage to the surface, but instead remained focused on their mission. They'd undergone months of training back on Earth and rehearsed their plan daily during the months-long journey aboard the Star Rider. They were ready. Before long, the shuttle settled into a safe landing and the crew assembled in the airlock, double-checking their equipment and trying to give one another encouraging glances and gestures. This was it. All eyes were on the light, signaling that the airlock cycle was complete. They would soon be the first humans to lay eyes on this distant moon, this answer to all of humankind's prayers. The survival of the human race may very well rest upon what they discovered. Suddenly, the ship was bombarded by dull-sounding impacts upon its hull. Even with their helmets on, the crew could hear a distant whirring sound, followed by a high-pitched noise, both of which preceded each impact. Roland moved closer to the porthole window and looked out. They were under attack. From his limited view, he could see creatures he could only describe as bipedal fish aliens. They wore no protective garments or helmets and were throwing boomerang-looking instruments which shot laser beams out in all directions as they flew. The weird objects would strike the hull and then return to the hands, fins, of their owners. All of this he conveyed to the rest of the crew, and they quickly enacted Protocol 15B, defend the Little Dipper using the squirt gun. Hank keyed into command on the wall of the airlock, confirming the order and bypassing the safety protocols as quickly as his gloved hands would move. The frequency of the impacts were increasing, and the sounds of the spinning laser boomerangs were intensifying. The fish aliens were drawing closer. Hank gave a wry smile, knowing that the squirt gun worked in a perimeter around the ship, throwing out an EMP-like field around it, which would scramble all electronics, including the nervous systems of anything within range. Looking to the security officer, Hank informed everyone that Squirt was armed and ready. Giving a curt nod, Roland looked back out the window to witness the effect. The burst shot out immediately after Hank punched the button, giving out a wet-sounding whooshing noise. They'd all been trained on the operation of the squirt gun, but had never actually seen it deployed, so it all momentarily stunned them. The crew's response was nothing compared to that of the fish aliens. As a one, they dropped inert to the ground, their curious boomerang laser weapons sailing off into the distance without anything to catch them. Eager to get out and examine the aliens, Dr. Starla hit the button to open the airlock and deploy the ramp to exit the ship, her customized medical scanner in hand. This is what she had dreamed about when she signed up for this mission. Actual first contact. Capital F, capital C. She'd be famous, instantly world-renowned, and garner the respect she so richly deserved. Nurse Janet moved more cautiously, following in the wake of Arceus, who appeared equally interested in studying the surrounding rock formations. He tossed his phantom pickaxe from hand to hand, a bizarre affectation that all crew members still found more than a little strange. But the geologist had demonstrated an uncanny ability to identify key elemental signatures in all minerals with only his taste buds. Penelope followed. She regretted leaving Stardust behind, but she wasn't sure how the dog would respond on an alien world. The ecologist glanced back to another port window and saw the terrier mix, paws up on the interior wall, looking out at her as she stepped off the ramp and onto the icy, rocky surface. Turning her attention outwards, she immediately noticed a strange impact crater in the vicinity and began taking optical measurements. Hank stayed aboard, ensuring the squirt gun was shut down properly and preparing to arm it again if necessary. The fish aliens appeared incapacitated, but there could be more. and one could never be sure of anything on an alien world. This sentiment was clearly shared by Roland, who withdrew his specially calibrated laser rifle and began inspecting the fish aliens for signs of life. If he found any, he'd extinguish them. A dead alien is a safe alien, was his motto. A constant flow of chatter passed between the crew as they utilized the helmet intercoms to relay information to one another. This was a rehearsed activity that they all did without thinking. If nothing else, the long travel time from Earth to Titan had taught them how to act as a team. Penelope indicated the impact crater. Dr. Starla discovered the aliens consumed heavy metals as fuels, but it was Arceus who made the most disturbing observation of all. The geologist, after tasting a mineral sample he uncovered with his phantom pickaxe by going through his unnerving throw it in the air and lick it pantomime, discovered the rocks were highly resistant to terraforming. Although the atmosphere was thick with nitrogen, in order to access the oxygen infused within the minerals, humans would have to pay a very high price. The revelation was quite a surprise to him and everyone else, considering experiments with previous rock samples back on Earth from the unmanned expedition indicated extraction would be quite simple. But this did not appear to be the case according to Arceus' infallible analysis. Rather, alveoli, the tiny air sacs that make up the bulk of human lung tissue, would need to be extracted in order to release the oxygen from the minerals. In other words, his analysis indicated that human lungs would need to be harvested in order to release the very oxygen needed by them in order to survive on the planet. It was a baffling, paradoxical discovery, even to the quirky scientist. While these communications continued, Roland executed all of the dozen or so fish aliens who were struck down by the squirt gun. Curiously, no one seemed to begrudge the security officer his callous duty. With their initial analysis of the aliens and minerals complete, the crew directed their attention to the impact crater Penelope had identified. Packing up their gear, they began walking while discussing their strange findings. Thus far, nothing had matched their expectations of the moon. The data from the unmanned expedition and other observations made from Earth had indicated Titan would be a viable candidate for terraforming, but their encounter with the hostile aliens and the tremendous price that had to be paid to extract oxygen from the minerals was sobering news indeed. As the crater loomed up before them, its elevated boulder field ringing the perimeter of the strike, Nurse Janet's voice rang out. The medical assistant was walking behind them when she called to them to stop and drop their weapons. Spinning around, they noticed a peculiar look on the face behind the protective glass of her helmet, but her hand was steady on the blaster pistol which she pointed at them. Taking a careful step forward, Hank asked her what she was doing. The Tinker had an uncanny way of reading people and determining if they were lying or not. With a short quaver in her voice, which they all heard through their headsets, she admitted she was being ordered to take them prisoner. Despite this admission, she didn't elaborate on who or what had ordered her to do this. While the nurse was distracted by Hank's inquiry, Dr. Starla quickly keyed in a frequency on her medical scanning device and then pointed it at her assistant. Hoping to cut the possible psychic bond between her nurse and whatever was directing her, the doctor hoped to free the woman from her compulsion. Nurse Janet dropped the pistol and slumped to the ground as if someone had ripped the bones from her body. Immediately afterwards, a piercing pain filled the crew members' heads. Clutching their helmets due to the pain and suddenness of the psychic barrage, they were virtually helpless. Roland's battle instincts kicked in, and he began firing his laser rifle indiscriminately towards the crater, the likely source of their distress. But his efforts were in vain, and he dropped the blaster as the pain only intensified. With a final, desperate effort, Dr. Starla keyed in a different frequency on her device, but it also had no effect. Writhing in pain, the crew all heard an alien voice in their heads command them to leave Titan immediately. The pain subsided as the crew backed away from the crater and began the short trek back to the Little Dipper. Carrying the unconscious Nurse Janet with them, they retreated as quickly as they could. But about halfway back, more fish aliens emerged from the crater, more than what had confronted them before, followed by an amazing sight. Seemingly floating up from the center of the crater was a hot air balloon-sized squid-like alien. It floated and drifted above the advancing fish aliens, its long tentacles brushing along the rocky, icy surface of the alien moon. It was enormous and gave off a pale blue glow which seemed to pulsate. Moving hastily, the crew retreated to their craft while Roland took pot shots at the floating monstrosity. His laser fire only deflected from the bulbous form and careened back towards the crew. Despite the aliens' command to leave the planet, it would seem it meant to destroy them before they could do so. Hank remembered the effect the squirt gun had on the fish aliens and believed it offered their only hope. The engineer dashed ahead, clambered into the airlock, and began keying up the sequence while the others followed. Suddenly, Dr. Starla and Arceus stopped, lying Nurse Janet prone on the ground. What was the doctor doing? She had withdrawn a laser scalpel from her medical kit and was preparing to cut the very much alive medical assistant open. Dr. Starla had the sudden idea to initiate extraction of oxygen from the moon's minerals by using Nurse Janet's lung tissue. Was this an idea by the geologist, or had she thought up the mad scheme on her own? Nevertheless, something stayed her hand. Perhaps subconscious defense mechanism within Janet awakened her, and her eyes fluttered open, and she stared directly into Dr. Starla's. Maybe Dr. Starla remembered her Hippocratic oath, or simply returned from the brink of madness. No matter. She stowed the laser scalpel, and together with Arceus, helped the nurse to her feet as they continued towards the awaiting shuttle ramp. Penelope's voice rang in everyone's headset. They couldn't fight this alien and its small army. They had to leave. Pronto. But Roland remained outside, guarding their retreat. He looked up the ramp towards Hank, who had nearly completed keying in the commands to initiate the squirt gun burst and launch the shuttle. Everyone else was in the airlock, looking at the blinking button on the screen, and then towards Roland. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He knew the ramp would immediately retract and leave Roland stranded on the planet. Hank had grown to love Roland during their time together. He simply could not, he would not, be the agent of his demise. Seeing Hank balk at his responsibility to save them all, and feeling how close the fish aliens and space squid were getting to all of them, Dr. Starla roughly shoved the engineer out of the way and pushed the button on the screen. The ramp slid up quickly, blocking the view the crew had of the advancing aliens and of Roland. Seconds later, the Little Dipper lifted up into the nitrogen-rich atmosphere and headed back to the Star Rider. What would become of Roland? Who were the aliens who inhabited Titan? What exactly was going on? Stellar Pioneers. Episodes inspired by Untold. Adventures await.